Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Nelson, Dean of the Center for Advanced Study in the Visual Arts here at the National Gallery of Art. And I am so thrilled to welcome you to the 73rd A.W. Mellon Lectures in the Fine Arts here at the Gallery, featuring Anna deaveresmith. I'm really excited for these 4 lectures, and I hope you're going to join us for all of them. Kaywin Feldman, Director of the National Gallery, will introduce our esteemed lecturer. Kaywin, come on up.
Thank you, Stephen. And I want to thank you all for coming today and for your patience as we sorted out seating. I'm Kaywin Feldman, the Director of the National Gallery of Art, and I am delighted to welcome you to this afternoon's event. As Stephen said, the 73rd A.W. Mellon Lecture in the Fine Arts. Inaugurated in 1949, the Mellon Lectures is the longest-running lecture series of the National Gallery. The series was founded to bring to the people of the United States the results of the best contemporary thought and scholarship bearing upon the subject of the fine arts. The program itself, of course, is named for Andrew W. Mellon, the museum's incredible visionary founder, who gave the nation his art collection and funds to build the museum, which opened to the public in 1941, so just before the lecture series started, in fact. The Mellon Lectures features the fine arts and also intersects with other disciplines and histories. The series has included not only art historians, but also artists, archaeologists, poets, and musicologists, who each engage in probing reflections about how and why the arts matter. Before introducing this afternoon's lecture, I'd like to thank Stephen Nelson, Dean of the National Gallery Center for Advanced Study, as well as the Center Associate Dean, Kyra Cabañas, and the Center and Gallery staff who have made today's program possible. So a round of applause for them, too. Thank you. And now I'm thrilled to introduce our esteemed speaker, the legendary actress on stage and on screen, Anna deaveresmith. In addition to being an actress, Smith is an award-winning playwright, teacher, and author. In the course of her career, Smith has created over 15 one-person shows based on hundreds of interviews. Her play, This Ghost of Slavery, was recently featured in the Atlantic magazine, making it one of only 2 plays published during the magazine's 166-year history. Other plays authored by Smith include Notes from the Field, about the school-to-prison pipeline, Let Me Down Easy, about health care, House Arrest, about the U.S. presidency and the press, and Twilight, Los Angeles, 1992, about the Los Angeles riots, and which was recently named one of the best plays of the last 25 years by the New York Times. You're going to be clapping a lot because there are a lot of extraordinary achievements on this list. Additional screen appearances include the films Philadelphia in 1993, The American President in 1995, and Rachel Getting Married in 2008. Fitting for our DC audience and location, she's also known for her role as National Security Advisor, Dr. Nancy McNally, in the TV series West Wing. Given the breadth of her acting and her prolific writing, it's no surprise that Smith is the recipient of multiple prestigious awards. Anna was awarded a MacArthur Foundation Genius Grant in 1996. In 2012, President Obama presented her with the National Humanities Medal. In 2013, she was the recipient of the Dorothy and Lillian Gish Prize for the Achievement in the Arts. In 2015, she was named the Jefferson Lecturer by the National Endowment for the Humanities, the nation's highest honor in the field. In addition to these recognitions for her original work, Smith has been nominated for the Pulitzer Prize for Drama and for 2 Tony Awards. She's the recipient of several honorary doctorates, including the University of Oxford, Spelman College, Yale University, Harvard University, and the Juilliard School. Wait, there's more. In addition to acting and writing, Smith also teaches. She is university professor at the Tisch School of the Arts in Tisch School of Arts of New York University. When asked in an interview what she teaches, Smith responded, "Now what I teach is best described as narrative. What is your story? I think that we all have about 3 fundamental stories inside of us about our lives, about how we see the world, and why." Smith's drive to elicit and capture stories is foundational to her work in theater, whereby she combines the journalistic technique of interviewing her subjects and interpreting their words in performance. In doing so, she communicates multiple perspectives that enrich public conversations about race, class, and social inequality. Today is the first of her 4-part lecture series, Chasing That Which Is Not Me, Chasing That Which Is Me, which will be presented in this auditorium and online every Sunday until May 19th, 2024. Delivered with segments of performance, Smith's Mellon Lectures examine material she collected as part of her project On the Road, A Search for the American Character, which is also the title of today's lecture, a project through which she has been interviewing Americans since 1980. Smith's Mellon Lectures at the National Gallery are poised to amplify public discourse about the powerful role that the arts can play in our understandings of the world. In this way, her words and the various lessons that we might take away from her lectures contribute to the gallery's ongoing mission in welcoming all people to explore and experience art, creativity, and our shared humanity. Please join me in welcoming Anna DeVere-Smith to the lectern.
Identity, it is, in a way, it's sort of, it's a psychic sense of place that lets us have an identity. And what's inside our identity is everything that ever happened to us. Everything that's ever happened to us and our responses to it. Because we might be alone in a trance state, someplace like the desert, and we begin to feel as though we are part of the desert, which we are right at that minute, but we are not the desert. We are part of the desert. And when we go home, we take with us that part of the desert that the desert gave us, but we're still not the desert. It's an important differentiation to make because you don't know what you're giving if you don't know what you have. And you don't know what you're taking if you don't know what's yours and what's somebody else's. That is word for word from an interview that I conducted of the late Ntozake Shange, Zaki, a.k.a. Paulette Williams. I interviewed her sometime between 1988 and 1989. I'll be talking about word for word in depth later on in this talk and throughout the series. Thank you so much, Stephen Nelson, for including me. It's an honor to be the 73rd Mellon Lecture. Thank you, Kaywin. And thank you for the entire staff and their work. I would name people, but today some extra people showed up. And so next week I'll name everybody. Thank you to my friend Eric Motley, who, like everybody else here, has extended hospitality. Please help me thank them for the hospitality they have extended. Paulette Williams, author of the groundbreaking play For Colored Girls Who Committed Suicide When the Rainbow Is Enough, spelled E-N-U-F, threw off her patriarchal name Paulette, her father was Paul, and buried her slave name Williams to be known as Ntozake Shange, which means she who comes with her own things, and she who walks like a lion. As you know, a lot of black folks started throwing off patriarchal names and burying slave names in the 1970s. Zaki not only threw off her patriarchal and slave names, she stretched the borders around which colored, Negro, black women had been portrayed on stage in TV and film. There were 7 different black women, colored girls, represented in For Colored Girls. She even specified that they should be performed by black women with different hues in their skin tones. The other frontierswoman was Adrienne Kennedy. They both refused to limit their dramatis personae to the desexualized bedrock mother figure, the overly sexualized strumpet, or Topsy, the naughty girl. They also brought new speech rhythms to dramatic form. In fact, if you listen carefully to the rhythms in For Colored Girls and then listen to current day spoken word, you will hear spoken word's ancestry. For Colored Girls hit Broadway as a full play in 1976, but was written in 1974 as a series of monologues. That's 50 years of an enduring rhythm. Zaki was the grandmother of spoken word. In 1973, my friend Donald Bogle published a book, Toms, Coons, Mulattoes, Mammies, and Bucks. It is an excellent account of how things were when Ntozake and Adrienne Kennedy hit the scene and broadened the canon of black females in dramatic literature. Donald, also black, was addicted to movies as a child. He wondered why the black actors like Hattie McDaniel, Mantan Moreland, Bill Bojangles Robinson would come on screen and disappear. Why weren't they the whole movie? He was able to see beyond the embarrassing stereotypes of Negro people, stereotypes constructed by white writers and white directors, to see the skill and talent of the performance. He saw the strength of Hattie McDaniel, the mammy in Gone with the Wind, her commanding voice, the choices emanating from her eyes. And you don't have to look hard to see the talent and skill of Bill Bojangles dancing with Shirley Temple. Mantan Moreland, Birmingham Brown in the Charlie Chan series, had perfected his craft in vaudeville, performing for black audiences. But when they entered the world of Hollywood, those skilled performances were packaged in a way that fostered racist attitudes. 1954 marked the culminating event of a long march towards equality with Brown versus Board of Ed. And so, in that time, a year before, in 1953, the NAACP had Amos and Andy, a show full of stereotypes, taken off the air. But taking stereotypes off the air did not kill them. In the 1970s, there was a surge of interest in black artists that emerged in the television and film industry, in part due to the commercial success of what were called blaxploitation films. Bogle perceived that the same stereotypes had come back again in different clothing, but the actors simply did not have the skill of those earlier technicians, those technicians that we had shunned. In everyday life, let alone when viewing artistic renderings of life, we do our own stereotyping. We stop looking at the particularness of how humans present themselves physically and vocally. One of my goals, and I hope you will observe this throughout my lecture series, has been to focus on the particular. We stop looking in part because we believe we've gathered enough information. We know everything. I hear you, I see it, but it doesn't take long to make a judgment, and we stop looking. And the judgment process, though necessary for survival, often causes a loss of a spiritual or moral opportunity. The judgments also become structural, or they emanate from structures. Martin Luther King, letter from a Birmingham jail. To use the words of Martin Buber, the Jewish philosopher, segregation substitutes an I-it relationship for an I-thou relationship and ends up relegating persons to the status of things. So segregation is not only politically, economically, and sociologically unsound, but it is morally wrong and sinful. Isn't segregation an existential expression of man's tragic separation, an expression of his awful estrangement? Acting is an artistic discipline which could be an I-thou practice, an I-thou form, but it is not at the moment. Chasing That Which Is Not Me was the title of the Jefferson lecture that I presented in 2015 for the NEH. Chasing That Which Is Not Me, Chasing That Which Is Me is a sequel, not because in the last 9 years I've had an epiphany about my identity. It is so because it's obvious. Identity is in relationship to. When we go home, we take with us that part of the desert that the desert gave us, but we're still not the desert in Sasaki. I had not planned to be an actor. If it were not for the 1960s, I would have become a school principal, just like my mother wanted me to. The 60s were full of disruption, blood, beauty, and violence. The 60s were both exhilarating and horrible. In the summer of 1967 alone, there were 150 race riots. There were assassinations, Vietnam, shattered assumptions. And yet the 60s held glamour. Glamour is beauty mixed with violence. The 60s flattened into the early 70s. The revolution wound down like a car with a flat tire. Nixon became president. Gloria Steinem put it to me this way: it took 3 murders to put Nixon in the White House, 2 Kennedys, and a Martin Luther King. Gloria Steinem has such a way of words. With words, it was also from Gloria that I learned the expression hopeaholic, as in she is an hopeaholic, and I'm a hopeaholic. She just celebrated her 90th birthday. That's what 90 looks like. I left Baltimore, my home, in 1971 for California. 2 friends encouraged me to come along with them for the road trip. I couldn't drive, but they thought my company was enough. We were going to change the world on the West Coast, whether the revolution was over or not. I had $80 in overnight bag, no driver's license, and no answers. Why don't you get it together and go to graduate school? No answer. It's July, and you still have not found a summer job. No answer. California? What you going to do out there in California? No answer. It didn't take long to get inspired. The tapestry of the West Virginia hills inspired me to try and learn America as land. I went to the southern tip of the West, Coronado Island, California. Blondes, bikes, tennis, the Navy. The waves weren't even big enough to inspire a surfing culture. And surfers would have brought a warmer vibe to the place. Blondes, bikes, tennis. I wondered if how I felt in Coronado, anxious, was how white people felt in the upper reaches of Harlem or the Bronx. I then went up the coast to San Mateo County, a suburb of San Francisco. It's Silicon Valley now. Then it was just a small town by the freeway not far from the airport. Flight attendants lived in the complex where I crashed at a friend's apartment till I got on my feet. First job, assistant manager of a drive-in movie theater. But working at the drive-in was more interesting than you would have thought. There was no one there. None of the kids who worked in a snack bar who I managed seemed familiar to me. So I was kind of fascinated. My boss was a drinker with two small children and a delicate-looking wife. One night drunk, he totaled his mustard-colored Triumph sports car in monsoon-like rain on the 101 freeway. I didn't have a driver's license, a situation in the half century before Uber made getting around the West Coast very difficult. Twice a week, I hitchhiked to Cal State Hayward, 19 miles away, to audit a course in black theater. I could always count on those great big tractor trucks to stop and give me a lift. Got a better job. And mentors. My new boss and his wife were fantastic-looking former UC Berkeley radicals. Black power kind of people. I'm going to talk about them in my last lecture. Through that job, I saved up enough dough to buy a used Pontiac. Drove into San Francisco after work to check out a black theater on Potrero Hill, which was then ungentrified, faded, dusty, foggy, surreal looking. The artistic director was sweeping the floor. When I walked in, I thought, well, that's pretty cool. The artistic director is sweeping the floor. Remember Miss Kitty on Gunsmoke? Anybody old enough? Clap if you are. Miss Kitty. Well, there was this black, sexy Miss Kitty-looking person lounging in the lobby. Hey, baby, you need something? In so many words, I told her that I was a refugee from the East Coast. Well, California is a good place to grow up. I asked if they needed any volunteers. She told me I could be the stage manager. I said, well, I'm not trained as a stage manager. Basically, she surmised, you have a good presence. People are going to listen to you when you tell them what to do. So I was a stage manager. It was a new world for me. I went to a party at the artistic director's very fine Victorian home. Folks were staring at a television set with the sound down. He had a very beautiful girlfriend who never spoke. I determined that you don't have to talk when you look like that. Even at rehearsal, the actors smoked a lot of dope. One of them noticed that I never took a hit. Oh, Annie don't need no dope. She high on life. Nothing got staged while I was there. Even so, I did feel like a sellout when I signed up for a summertime acting class at the biggest, richest, all-white theater in town. Probably one, if not only two, of the biggest, richest repertory theaters in all of the West Coast. I was amazed by acting class. People were changing. Well, this must be a metaphor for social change. The ingredients for social change must be here. I took notes about every single thing the teacher said. But acting is an illusion. It is an illusion of change. It is an illusion of changing identity. It is an illusion of adjustment. It is an illusion of persona. I studied everything that happened before my eyes as if it were a science. But acting is not a science. It's a mystery. The magical mystery tour began in Shakespeare class. The first stop on the magical mystery tour. As we stroll in, Juanita Pat Rice, the teacher, waits with impatience, looking as if she's about to pounce. She wore army fatigues and a flowered blouse, in considerable contrast to the more ethereal couture of the other teachers. Birkenstocks. Birkenstocks were not hip then. Birkenstocks, big, big Mexican sweaters. The last straggler finally comes in. If this were a movie, I would have that last straggler doing something kind of silly, like, I don't know, playing with a yo-yo. You know, we're silly with intention. Remember that. And some of us are proud of coming from the tradition of clown and fool. You know, actors aren't like opera singers. I worked on my first opera the first day of rehearsal. The room was full of these young, black, vibrant opera singers sitting straight up in their chairs, waiting for rehearsal to begin. That's not us. We're more likely to be playing with a yo-yo or having a cup of coffee. Juanita Pat Rice plunges in. The language of Shakespeare requires only allegiance to the words. No need to impose your inner life on the perfectly constructed words. Mr. Yo-Yo pipes up. Just wondering, because our other acting teacher said that what we're looking for is truth. And the truth is inside of us. There is a Hamlet in me. That's what I'm after. That moment made me very nervous. I didn't know Juanita Pat Rice yet, but her searing intelligence was very evident in her eyes. She transitioned from looking like she was going to say something like, "That's idiotic," to calmly quoting the well-known quote, "Speak the speech I pray you speak the speech I pray you as I pronounced it to you trippingly on the tongue." I'm going to try it again, because that's like the whole point of speak the speech I pray you as I pronounced it to you trippingly on the tongue. We were about to learn that Hamlet was in the words and in the subtle rhythm of the words, not in our interior lives. No matter what kind of metaphors we could come up with about our 22, 23, 24 years of living in Chicago, Milwaukee, Utah, wherever. Soon she was positing that irregularity in rhythm was the sign that things had gone awry in the character's life and world. If the normal rhythm of Shakespeare was iambic, pentameter, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da, if that were to change, especially in the second beat, da-da-da-da, da-da, if the second beat were to change, that was an indication that something was upside down inside the character and in the world. Her example, of course, was King Lear's language at the very end, when he's lost everything. Or if he had a chance to see Glenda Jackson's remarkable performance, she lost everything, and Cordelia, the favorite child, is dead. Why should a dog, a horse, a rat have life? And thou no breath at all? Thou'lt come no more. Never, 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 never. It was the never, 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 never that she emphasized. Everything upside down. Everything was upside down. For the Jefferson lecture, I talked about Queen Margaret, Richard III, who provided the first stop on the Magical Mystery Tour about Shakespeare. Our assignment that very day was take 14 lines of Shakespeare and say them over and over again until something happens. You can imagine that Sir Yo-Yo and others were wishing for something more concrete than that for the assignment. The problem I would soon learn, and even now know well as a teacher, that there is nothing explicit to teach in acting. Everything we can do to teach actual acting, not the things that go with it, movement, speech, and so forth, everything is couched in metaphors. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. I did the exercise exactly like she said. I said 14 lines of Queen Margaret, happened to be a curse against Richard, over and over again, over and over again, over and over again, for several hours. Now, now that I think about it, it's not so ridiculous. My friend Joshua Roman, with whom I collaborate sometimes, a classical cellist, practices for 5 hours a day. Why shouldn't I spend a few hours saying 14 lines over and over again? And something did happen. I saw Queen Margaret. I saw her right there in the basement of the apartment that I had rented for the summer. I conjured her. I had not had any substance. No chemical substance that could have rendered that transcendental experience. That experience occupied my imagination for about 4 or 5 years. I thought the experience of the summer was just that, a summer experience. But I wasn't going to go back to the College of San Mateo to work with Liz and Dave, who was trying to convince me to get a PhD. I ended up being one of 15 people that were chosen out of 250 to be a part of their real training congress. I didn't even know they had a real training congress. I sure didn't know they were looking for people. We have a place for you here if you would like it. Alan Fletcher was his name. I thought to myself, I belong here? I belong here? In this theater? I belong? And this was the golden era. ACT had 52 actors in the repertory company. I belong here? At the richest, whitest regional theater on the West Coast. I belong here? In this illusion-making form? I endured what turned out to be a pretty difficult situation and left with an MFA. I left Baltimore with $80 and an overnight bag and no answers. I left California for New York. Actually, I still didn't have a lot more than $80. But I left with a union card, a graduate degree, not an answer, but a question. What happened in my apartment when I said 14 lines of Shakespeare and conjured Queen Margaret? Having a question is different from having no answers. Guess that's why the word question includes the syllable quest, as in search. It changed the trajectory of my life. However powerful the experience was, it was brutal. I was poor. I never hung out. I was just about the only black person around. But I was so absorbed in the craft. But how did I get through it? Was it stamina? Was it grace? Grace is another mystery. And grace was understood as something that comes from God. A mystery. See, grace is not a human product. It doesn't come from human beings. Grace is a gift. It's a gift that you can't earn. And if you think you own it, then you lose it. That's Reverend Dr. James H. Cone, the late Reverend Cone, who I performed in my play Let Me Down Easy will be the subject. Let Me Down Easy will be the subject of lecture number 3. Cone was iconic, the author of Black Theology, Black Power, advocate of Black liberation theology. 1979, living in New York. I'm a bus girl at the Horn of Plenty, a soul food restaurant in the Village. I'm still obsessed. How did I conjure Queen Margaret? My master's thesis towards developing method turns out to be a ticket to job interviews. I landed a job at Carnegie Mellon University, tenure track. Anybody a professor here on the track? Then you know the tenure track squeezes every bit of life out of you. So I stay 1 year and decide I'd rather walk dogs. And make enough money to construct a lab or a workshop to figure out what happened with Queen Margaret. And I did walk a dog. BB. BB was the miniature Doberman that belonged to a woman who was one of the first individuals to coach newscasters. She coached Oprah, Barbara Bush, George Bush. Typing up her notes was a school in itself. I meet a linguist by accident. She's curious about what I do. I don't want to say I'm an actor because then the next question is going to be, what have I seen you in? And she would not have seen me in anything. I tell her about Queen Margaret and King Lear how I have a feeling that people also will speak in irregular rhythms if they, like King Lear, face loss or disruption, or like Queen Margaret, feel that they must curse somebody or something. And she told me I was absolutely right. And she gave me 3 questions that I could ask everyday people that would cause them to break out into trochees, dadas. The questions were, have you ever come close to death? Have you ever been accused of something that you did not do? Do you know the circumstances of your birth? I put together a workshop for a 2-nights-only production. I'd walk up to people on the streets of New York and say, I know an actor who looks like you. If you give me an hour of your time, I'll invite you to see yourself performed. I would talk to them about anything they want to talk about. Swimming lanes at the Y. Swimming lanes in Japan. The hilarity of what happens when a bunch of black people get stuck on a bus back to Jersey. Meredith Monk, the composer, about Bartok in New Mexico. I rent a loft in Tribeca. The real people come parading in with friends and family, and the actors perform them. And it worked. People say, how do you know it worked? I say, because everybody was happy. On a trip home to Baltimore, I didn't expect anybody to understand what I was talking about, what I was doing. My mother had seen an early work of mine while I was in acting school and said, you know, I think you're before your time. Which was the nicest, most encouraging thing she could have possibly said. My father hadn't seen very much at all, but it was my father who had the next key. I told him about what I was trying to do with language and performance and saying words over and over again, and he got it. I was shocked. He reminded me that my grandfather had said when we were kids, if you say a word often enough, it becomes you. And as for Queen Margaret, I did not become her, but she did come to me. She came to me. I couldn't afford a whole troupe of actors to do that kind of theater I was concocting, so I just decided I would do it all as a one-person show, and that I would attempt to become America word for word, repeating the words that I heard, and ultimately utterances, intentionally chasing that which was not me. I wasn't working in Baltimore. I wasn't working on what it was to grow up in segregated Baltimore, and maybe that's because I thought that I could close the gap between myself and others who seemed so different. The gap that had been created in my consciousness growing up in a segregated city. On the road to search for American character, I would enjoy the land and put myself in other people's words, the way you think about putting yourself in other people's shoes. For example, Brent Williams, the bull rider who I met in Sun Valley, and then went out to where he lived in Shoshone later. Brent Williams, rodeo bull rider, toughness. Well, basically, I'm an optimist. That's what I like to say. I'm an optimist, because sometimes I think, man, I got bad luck. But then I think back, they could have took my kidney. Like, I had a lot of bad things happen to me. I could have lost my kidney, so that was good luck, that I kept my kidney, And my wife's family says, you don't ever think he's just a born loser, and he just had so much bad luck, But I read this deal in Reader's Digest. Things like this happen so funny. Like, I go to the doctor last CAT scan, and there's this Reader's Digest from October 2002 sitting there, and it talks about 7 ways to be lucky, and it's talking about, you got to be around positive people if you want to be lucky. And like my wife, when I told my wife you were going to come out here and talk to me and interview me, she said she won't call you. She's just talking. She's just being nice to you. She's just being nice to you. She don't really want to do that, And then when I said that you wanted to come and interview me, she said she went and looked you up on the internet and said, look who she is, you're not even going to be able to answer her questions. she was worried that like I was going to make myself look like an idiot because you know, I didn't go to college. She's going to think that I'm not going to know how to talk professionally. You know, she was worried because I didn't know how to talk professionally. You know, and I was like, I talked to the lady already for 4 hours. If I didn't talk like she wanted me to talk, you know, if she was worried about me not being professional, I just don't think I'm a born loser. Confidence, well, confidence is a part of it. But I ride more out of determination than confidence. Confidence is like you've been on that bull before, you know you can ride him. Confidence is kind of like being cocky about it, but in a good way. And if you ride with determination, fuck the form, get the horn. Tuff Hedeman saying he's in the movie 8 Seconds, and you know he's a world champion like 3 times because he didn't ride he rode with determination. Just hang on to the whistle blows, no matter if you're riding upside down. Determination, like Pat, my wife's uncle, he always said, man, you got the most try than any kid I ever seen. Try and determination is the same thing. And you know, like it's a lot of times that there's a lot of bull riders, they safety up, and me, I've never safetied up my whole life, and a lot of times it may get me stepped on or something. Like determination, freedom. That have to be the rodeo. Beauty. I don't know if I know what beauty is. Oh, I guess I have to be the rodeo too. See how we are, Ruffy family, always shaking hands. We eat together, ride together, racking up our credit cards on entry fees and gas, just wrestling around just like a family. And you know, when you ride bull and you do good and riding, you feel like, you know, like there ain't nothing in the world that could probably like, you know, beat you up like that, you know, like I feel like life couldn't be better, you know, like it's what life's supposed to be. I don't know, like, because there's just so much power in it. I mean, I think about it. You shouldn't be able to stay on the back of a bull that's trying to buck you off, you know, because we weigh 150 pounds, you know, they weigh 2,000 pounds, you know, just feel like a king at that moment. And I mean, you know, you can't stay on top of every bull, but it's just something inside you that keeps you on that bull. If I couldn't ride bulls, it'd just be a big old gap, big old space in me. I think probably, maybe even bigger empty space in the day, you know, when like my brother died, you know. Toughness. We was in West Jordan, Utah, and this bull shoved my face right through the metal chutes. So my buddies drove me to the hospital. Took 5 hours to sew me up. When they straightened out my nose, I've been at the rodeo. I was going to be at the rodeo that night. I didn't really want them to put me under anesthesia or however you say that word. So I told them just to do it without it. And they shoved these 2 rods up your nose and worked their way up, and it straightens your nose all up. It felt like they was shoving it clear through to my brain. It was going to come out the top of my head. And everybody saw it, and they said it should have killed me, and they didn't even knock me out. So I have a high tolerance of pain. So I guess that would be toughness, you know, I guess. But once they did that, I could breathe, and I hadn't been able to breathe through my nose since I broke it when I was like in the high school rodeo. That is a picture of Brent in Shoshone taken by the photographer and my good friend, Diana Walker. Brent Williams. The late Mary Ellen Mark, photographer, wrote in the intro to the catalog for her show, American Odyssey, the camera creates the necessary distance to get close to strangers, and the tape recorder and the interview process in general creates, for me, the necessary distance to get close to strangers. Sometimes I enjoy the hospitality. For example, Brent invited me to the rodeo finals in Las Vegas. Stood around with all those bull riders half the night in the bar, even as they boasted about the women and drank Shivas. Promises. Most of the Americans that I meet believe in the promise that the country holds, though in different ways. And just because a promise is not kept does not mean a person stops believing in the promise. Some individuals are able to proceed with a belief in the American dream. You can make it if you try. Others gave up on what they would call nonsense a long time ago. But even resistance is a part of the promise. Resistance to the idea that you do not deserve the promise to be fulfilled. If you give up on the promise completely, that would be despair. In 1850, Salmon P. Chase, abolitionist lawyer, defender of runaway slaves, Secretary of the Treasury in the Lincoln administration, and eventually Justice of the Supreme Court, writes to Frederick Douglass asking about the colonization of blacks. Dear Douglass, I should be glad to learn your views as to the probable destiny of the African American race in this country. My own opinion has been that the black and white races would never have been brought together in one community except under the constraint of force, such as that of slavery. I have regarded, therefore, the coexistence of the two races as coerced, and therefore not likely or permanent, or to endure for a much longer period than the coercing force, namely slavery. While therefore I have been utterly opposed to any discrimination in legislation against our colored population and have uniformly maintained the equal rights of all men to liberty and the pursuit of happiness, I have always looked forward to the separation of the races by the removal of slavery. I thought it not unlikely that the islands of the West Indies and portions of South America would be populated from the United States by the black race. At the present moment, it seems to me that the British West Indies offer a most inviting field for colored enterprise. I shall be pleased to know what you think of these matters, which have doubtless attracted your attention. Yours, S.P. Chase. Douglass responds with a long letter. Here are some excerpts. It is idle, worse than idle, ever to think our expatriation or removal, to imagine that we shall ever be eradicated is absurd and ridiculous. We can be remodified, changed, and assimilated, but never extinguished. We are here, and that this is our country. And the question for the philosophers and the statesmen of the land ought to be, what principles should dictate the policy of the action towards us? We shall neither die out nor be driven out, but shall go with this white people, either as a testimony against them or as an evidence in their favor throughout their generations. Either as a testimony against them or as an evidence in their favor throughout their generations. Finding belongingness in spite of the parameters set by others takes imagination and takes resilience. But notice, that's how perhaps Frederick Douglass was making the promise possible. Hospitality. You know, I've had the opportunity to go, for example, and work on an Indian reservation. My friend, Abby Abinante, who is their chief judge, lived with a wolf in college. She's pretty tough. So when she wrote to me after my first visit there, You belong with us by the river, the Klamath River, which opens onto the Pacific Ocean, an hour north of Eureka, California. It meant a lot to me. Not only because to be allowed on the Yurok reservation gave me a chance to learn things, to work with Native youth, to learn how they see the world, but it was a gift. It was a gift that I did not take for granted. Or was it grace, to be welcomed where I don't belong? Or was it hospitality? Hospitality. Kant. Hospitality means the right of a stranger not to be treated as an enemy when he arrives in the land of another. One may refuse to receive him when this can be done without causing his destruction, but so long as he peacefully occupies his place, one may not treat him with hostility. Hospitality. Benedictine Rule, chapter 53. The reception of the poor and of pilgrims. In the reception of the poor and of the pilgrims, the greatest care and solicitude should be shown, because it is especially in them that Christ is received. As far as the rich are concerned, the very fear which they inspire wins respect for them. Hospitality, restaurateur, Danny Meyer. Long after people forget how delicious the chicken was, they will remember how you made them feel. Okay. So this is Jack Whitten's painting Autopolis. I first saw it at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. Glenn Lowry, the director of the museum, calls it magisterial, and I agree. And this painting holds a lot of lessons for me about belongingness, about being where you belong or don't belong. The title is Autopolis for Edouard Glissant. Autopolis. I just saw a handwritten note, or facsimile of one, on a yellow pad, written by Whitten. Autopolis could mean a city located nowhere, though in this instance, it refers to what constitutes a city. A polis is a community of persons of various origins. Autopolis is a made-up word, a contraction of atopos and polis. It relates to Glissant's long-term commitment to try to articulate a thoroughly interconnected and egalitarian relationship between humans. Community, nature, between animi and inanimate things, between imaginary, the symbolic, and the real. Not. Topos, place, polis, city. In Greek, atopy, placelessness, unclassifiable, of a high originality. Glissant's emphasis on an imaginary city constructed out of elements from anywhere, borderless city, built from the uprooted, upgrounded, and the nomadic destinies of old, and new migrants, a fluid identity. Nomadic destinies of old and new migrants, a fluid identity. Whitten wrote elsewhere, ever since white imperialist entrepreneurs forced us into slavery, Black identity has been linked to our not having a sense of place. This sense of place for us had to be created through hard work involving all our faculties of being. And I would say that's been the case for me. I was chasing that which is not me, not to run away from myself or even to run away from Baltimore. After all, it was a trip to Baltimore and sitting at the table with my father that I was reminded of something that my grandfather had said, which was key to my search for American character, the three keys being Shakespeare, a random linguist, I don't even remember her name, and Deaver Young-Smith Sr., my paternal grandfather. If you say a word often enough, it becomes you. Glissant, in The Poetics of Relation, writes, Errantry, therefore, does not proceed from renunciation, nor from frustration regarding a supposedly deteriorated situation of origin. It is not an absolute act of rejection or an uncontrolled impulse of abandonment. Sometimes, by taking up the problems of the other, it is possible to find oneself. There's an American who is well known to all of you, was known to all of you, part of the heartbeat of this city, who, to me, exemplified the need to go where you didn't belong and to negotiate a new belongingness, and that is Congressman John Lewis. And this, the late Congressman John Lewis, and this is called Brother. On our way on this trip that we've been taking for the past 13 years. I've been going back every year since 1965, back to Selma to commemorate the anniversary of Bloody Sunday that took place on March 7, 1965. But we usually stop in Birmingham for a day, and then we go to Montgomery for a day, and then we go to Selma. But on this trip to Montgomery, we stop at First Baptist Church, the church that was pastored by Reverend Ralph Abernathy. It's the same church where I met Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Reverend Abernathy in the spring of 1958. Young police officer, white, the chief, came to the church to speak on behalf of the mayor that was not available. And he gave a very moving speech to the audience. The church was full, black, white, Latino, Asian Americans, members of Congress, staffers, family members, children, and grandchildren. And he said what happened in Montgomery 52 years ago during the Freedom Ride, when you arrived, was not right. The police department didn't show up. They allowed an angry mob to beat you. And he said, Congressman, I'm sorry for what happened. Want to apologize. This is not the Montgomery that we want Montgomery to be. This is not the Montgomery that I want to be the chief of. Before any officers are had, he said, they go through training. They have to study the life of Rosa Parks, the life of Martin Luther King Jr. They have to visit the historic sites of the movement. They have to know about what happened in Birmingham, what happened in Montgomery, and what happened in Selma. He said, I want you to forgive us. He said, to show the respect that I have for you, I want to take off my badge and give it to you. And this church was so quiet, no one said a word. And I stood up to accept the badge, and I started crying. And everybody in the church started crying. It was not a dry eye in the church. And I said, Officer, Chief, I cannot accept your badge. I'm not worthy to accept your badge. Don't you need it? He said, Congressman Lewis, I can get another one. I want you to have my badge. And I took it. And I'm never ever going to forget it. I will hold on to it forever. But he hugged me. I hugged him. I cried some more. And you had Democrats and Republicans in the church crying. Young deputy assistant, young black officer was sitting down. He couldn't even stand. He cried so much like a baby, really. It was the first time that a police chief in any city where I visit or where I got arrested during the 60s that ever apologized or where I was beaten. It was a moment of grace. It was a moment of reconciliation. And the chief was very young. He wasn't even born 52 years ago. But he was offering an apology and to be forgiven on behalf of his associates, of his colleagues of the past. It's a moment of grace. It means that the suffering and the pain that so many people have suffered have been redeemed. But then for the police officer, the chief, to come and ask to be forgiven, it felt so good. And at the same time, so freeing and liberating to have this young man come up. He hugged me, he held me, and I felt like I'm just one. I'm just one of the people. Many people were beaten. It is. It's amazing grace. You know that line in there? Y'all know Amazing Grace? Uh-huh.
Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I was lost, but now I'm found.
Amazing grace. You know that line in there, save a wretch like me. It's in a sense that we all fallen short. It save a wretch like me, because we all just trying to make it. We all searching. We all, as Dr. King say, we were out to redeem the soul of America. We first had to redeem ourselves. But this message, this act of the badge of grace, it says to me, hold on. And never give up. Never give in. Never lose faith. Keep the faith. Chasing that which is not me, chasing that which is me. Thank you.